So that was the science. And that was in the 1960s when these ideas were coming about, that the two hemispheres were doing different things. And the 1960s was a very strange time with the counterculture, youth rebellion against the strictures of the post-war era, austerity, Korean and Vietnam wars. And so this all got muddled up with these ideas of the left brain and the right brain. And towards the end of the 60s, a book was written by Bogan, which took this as an analogy and tried to apply it to society. And it contrasted the propositional, fact-finding, systematic, talking left brain with the right brain, which it said, well, we don't really know much about what the right brain does, which was true. But if the left brain does one sort of thing, the right brain must do the other. So you have got the propositional left with the apropositional right. And this fitted in with Eastern concepts like yin and yang, darkness and light, where you've always got two polar sort of paired opposites. So the right brain came to be linked with everything that the left brain didn't do, or the opposite to what the left brain did do. And that fitted with Western intuition, ideas about intuition versus reason as two opposites. And in this book, Bogan described various cross-cultural studies to claim that this dichotomy, if you like, of ability was worldwide. It wasn't cultural, it applied across all of humanity. And soon it became linked by Ornstein with more social questions, saying that actually society places too much emphasis on left brain functions. It values too much conformity, obedience to authority. And he argued that we need to challenge these things. Again, this is end of the 60s, early 1970s. So you can see how it fits with its time, perhaps, if you try to cast yourselves back into that era. And his argument was that education should liberate the creative powers of the right brain. So here we have the idea, at last, that I'm focusing on, that the right brain is creative and needs to be liberated. And this is probably the closest we can get to a systematic origin for this idea. But if we go back to what Gazzaniga thinks of the right brain, well, here's one of his quotes. It could well be argued that the cognitive skills of a normal, disconnected right hemisphere without language are vastly inferior to the cognitive skills of a chimpanzee. So think back to these websites offering to train your children to be future leaders by enabling them to use the right side of their brain more often. Do you want the world to be led by chimpanzees? That's what Gazzaniga says will happen. Why does he say that? Well, if we go to the nobelprize.org website, there's another little online thing. I want you to try and play with this in your own time, and you can test out the experiments to see what the right brain can apparently do on its own. The summary so far is that we've seen the popular notion that's out there on websites and in textbooks that the right hemisphere is more creative than the left. And that, although it arose from medical scientific work in the 1960s on these split brain patients who'd had epilepsy, it actually comes from the 1960s counterculture. So the science didn't identify the right brain with creativity. It just said the left brain does language and the right brain doesn't. And we can see how each hemisphere controls the opposite sides of the body and receives information from the opposite visual fields. So the fact that the 1960s counterculture favoured all of these non-sort of rational, confrontational, rebellious aspects that were identified as the opposite of the things, the logical, systematic things that the left brain did do, means that the right hemisphere's abilities came to be seen more positively. And so you get this movement saying, we must encourage, liberate, train the right-hand side of the brain. And it comes from these experiments carried out by Sperry, Gazzaniga and his colleagues that rely on the fact that the left hemisphere is the only one that can talk, and so the only one that can report its reasoning to you, and that's also the most dominant hemisphere in most people, so it controls your right hand and allows you to draw and do fine manipulation and motor skills and things. So it's almost set up to do the logical, structured tasks.